Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Philip Phillips, and I'm the Associate Dean of the University Honors College. Pleased to welcome everyone here to our last session for the semester. Dean Weil and I are happy to have two of your peers as our speakers today, two students whom we've selected who have successfully defended their honors theses and have graciously agreed to come and share their research and their general experiences with the class. I'm going to introduce both of the speakers and then have them both come up, give their presentations, and then we'll save all the questions for the end of class. So our first speaker is Sarah Dixon-Morgan, who is an international relations major from Knoxville, Tennessee. She's minoring in philosophy and journalism and plans to attend law school following her graduation in May. Her thesis is titled Learning from the Student's Perspective, and her thesis advisor is Dr. Ryan Corsange from the University Studies. Our second speaker is Matthew Cureton, who is one of our honors transfer fellows from Newport, Tennessee. He transferred from Walters State Community College. His major is business management. The title of his thesis is Restoration and Preservation of Tower Houses in Ireland, a regional study conducted in County Tipperary, Ireland. Dr. Stacey Graham and Dr. Mark Doyle advised him throughout the thesis process. So we'll begin with Sarah and we'll move on to Matthew.
All right, well, hello. Yes, my name is Sarah Dixon-Morgan, and I'm an international relations student. So this is my thesis was on learning from the student's perspective. And I'm rather proud of this title because it's kind of dually faceted. In the first sense, it means that we're talking about the learning process from the student perspective, but we're also talking about qualitative data. So I myself was learning from the student's perspective. So I'm proud of that, even though it's kind of silly. Like I said, my study was qualitative research. So I had 5 students in one of the courses here at MTSU, which was intimidating because with 5 students, I was worried I wouldn't have a lot to say. But what I learned was that in the qualitative analysis, it really brought the student's perspective out of it, hence the title, and allowed them to tell their stories. So what I focused on was on how students learn and how students study and how that overall affects their academic success. So like I said, it's qualitative research, which is something in the learning science field that is not happening very often. Too often, I think we rely on numbers, the quantitative aspect, GPAs, ACT scores, GRE scores for postgrad, and numbers that don't tell the student's perspective, that don't give what happened in the student's semester, how they study, and how far they've come. So that's really what I focused on in my thesis. So these are my 3 hypotheses that I focused on. The first one was that I hypothesized that students don't always utilize effective learning techniques. That's a fair assumption. I myself am guilty of that sometimes. So I hypothesized that they're using these because they're easy and they're fast. These methods include like cramming, just rereading your notes, things that you could do 5 minutes before an exam. My second hypothesis was that when students are exposed to research-proven, highly effective methods, they would use them. And my last hypothesis was that these study methods that students are choosing reflect how they're going to do in college, even if it's just in one semester. So these are my participants, and I recognize the irony, this is quantitative data, but these are the numbers that kind of define the students. The names of the students were changed for the security and to spare their identity, but these numbers begin to tell the picture of the students. So at first glance, one of the things that is most noticed is high school GPA and self-reported. The self-reported is important because 2 students inaccurately self-reported their GPAs. One over-exaggerated. So if you see Adam self-reported a 3.2, but he actually had a 3.6, which is weird. He wasn't apparently proud of his 3.6. But Emily, on the other hand, self-reported at 3.9, but actually had a 3.4. So that's a pretty big difference. That did, tie into my analysis, but ultimately, we were looking at maybe why the students, how that can translate into their perspective. So the other thing is the ACT scores. So if you'll notice, the highest ACT score on this is a 28, and again, that's Adam, who had a 3.6 in high school. Now, I know it got cut off, unfortunately, but this at the bottom is their cumulative GPA after the semester of my study, which was in the spring. And the interesting part is that Adam had a 28 on his ACT and a 3.6 in high school, but his final GPA after his first semester of college was a 2.1. So, looked like a real winner, but turns out he didn't know how to study. Alternatively, Emily, she had a 3.4 in high school, but had a 3.4 at the end of her first semester of college. So the 3.4 is, it's kind of middle of the range, and it's not as high as Adam's either, but with the ACT score, it's 19, which is much lower than Adam's. So you would notice, maybe which student would you think would do better? Which student would get into the honors college here at MTSU? So that's kind of the things that I looked at in looking at these numbers and then talking to them about why they chose to study the way they did. So in talking to Adam, he crammed a lot. He never recognized an effective study method. And I tried to gauge if they knew the effective methods based on this chart here, which lists all of the study methods that I studied in this thesis. And the three most notable and highly effective based on research include the practice testing, spreading out study sessions, and mixing up the topics. Those inadvertently are the least used methods from college students, just backed by a lot of other research and in my research as well. Like I said, I only had 5 students, so it's not very generalizable, but so for these students, like I said, Adam used cramming, and that was about it, which I think translates to his overall GPA at the end of the semester. And then for Emily, she used the most effective methods, but she also used ineffective methods. So she noted using practice testings, and she noted using rereading notes and highlighting and underlining, which those two are some of the very least effective methods you could ever use in studying based on research. But she used those, and so it points to the fact that it's in how she approaches college and how she approaches her college courses. And so with my thesis, what I ended up figuring out to be one of the most important aspects of determining academic success for students is in a term called academic grit, based on Angela Duckworth's research. Some of you may be familiar with that. I think we talk about it quite a lot in this university. It's the idea that you're more successful if you think of whatever you're doing in terms of long-term goals and your passion for it. So with Emily, I think it was really clear that while she may not have been using all of the effective methods, she was passionate about her school. She spent a lot of time studying, and she also knew herself and how she should study, whereas Adam clearly did not. So in summary of my thesis, what I learned most was that these students have stories to tell, and they have reasons for why they choose their study methods that they do. They're not using effective methods, and so my first hypothesis was that if they learned effective methods, they would use them, and that was really wrong. It did not take very long in the semester for me to ask them some questions and realize that even when they were presented with practice testing and distributive practice, spreading out your study sessions, they were not incorporating them. They didn't want to, and they trusted their cramming methods because it had gotten them that far. One of the students even quoted, he simply was trying to get through the system. So it was that acknowledgement that students maybe aren't in university because they're passionate about learning. They're here because they feel like they have to be, or because maybe their parents told them to. So in my research, it helped to point to the fact that the students may not be predicted, their success might not be predicted by the numbers. ACT score of a 28, that looks like he's going to be a really successful college student, but he wasn't. 2.1 is pretty low. So that's ultimately what I discovered in my thesis and what I was able to explore through that qualitative research that I don't think I would have got had I done a quantitative study. So I wanted to touch a little bit on what I learned and how it was helpful for me as I pursue law school and potentially doing a master's in environmental studies. So like he said at the beginning, my major is international relations, so it's not necessarily relevant to student learning, but the cool thing about my thesis is I think it's relevant to anybody that's in college. So while it might not be directly related to international politics or international studies, for me this was something I was passionate about. I wanted to learn how students were learning and how students were doing in college and how they approach their courses. So it was an opportunity for me to explore that and explore something that I was passionate about. And ultimately the process of defending and writing a 70-page document and really going out of my comfort zone as far as time management has helped me to prepare for law school, but also, in life. I thought I was good at time management before I did this. I was wrong. This project helped me to realize when you don't have a set deadline except for at the very end of the semester, you have to kind of manage it yourself. And that was one of the things that was really valuable to me. I've already used it, in so many different ways in applying for law schools and things like that, where I've been able to use my time management skills that I learned from this project. I know the typical stigma of completing this honors thesis is that it's really difficult and really time consuming, and that's true, it is. It's not easy. But I did this thesis in the spring, I started in the spring, and since then I've been working 30 hours every week, maintaining that job and a high GPA, and so I think it's really possible. And I think the most important thing for me was to do something that I was passionate about, which I successfully did. So.
Hello everyone, my name is Matthew Cureton, and my thesis was on the restoration and preservation of tower houses in Ireland. Before I begin, I do want to thank Dean Phillips for allowing me to come here and present my research. Has anyone ever been to Ireland? All right, 1, 2, 3 people. Okay, all right. I spent 5 weeks there performing this research. So let's talk about it. What I'm going to talk to you all about is the research that I've done, what tower houses are, overview of that, how I performed my research, and my research findings. So this is a tower house. Tower houses are castles built in Ireland from about the 15th to 17th century. They're usually 2 to 4 stories high, sometimes 5 to 6. There was actually about 3,000 of them built in Ireland from about the 15th to 17th century. And they provided a protective residential space for prosperous landowners. So not the really, really rich, they had the big, huge castles, and not the poor, just ones who kind of needed a small protective space. And they went out of style about the 17th century. That's when they started falling into ruin. It is believed that the end of the tower houses came when Oliver Cromwell invaded Ireland. He was a English militant leader, and he took captive a lot of the tower house owners, destroyed some of the tower houses, partially destroyed them. Some of them that are still standing have like holes in them from where he blew holes into them. So that's kind of believed what came to the end of tower houses, and we'll kind of come back to that here in just a little bit. So today, there's a lot of them standing, not 3,000 of them, but there's still quite a few. When I was traveling through Ireland, I traveled by bicycle. I would just see one off in the distance above the skyline. It was really neat. But unfortunately, not a lot of them nowadays are being restored. And that's why I wanted to research why they are not being restored. So let's see here. And like I said, I traveled to Ireland in May of 2018. I spent 5 weeks there. 2.5 weeks specifically was riding by bicycle from town to town. I went about 190 miles during my whole trip. It was very tiring, and I never want to ride a bicycle again. But this is my hypothesis. While the preservation laws were meant to protect historic monuments, they have prevented and deterred many property owners from restoring their tower houses into modern-day livable residence. So my hypothesis was that the laws were preventing them. It was based on a claim by Dr. Victoria McAllister. She is an assistant professor of history at Southeast Missouri State University. She had conducted research on tower houses for her doctoral dissertation, and she said, there are, quote, plenty of complaining farmers wanting to restore their tower houses, but finding it easier to store farm machinery in them, end quote. So that's kind of what I based my hypothesis on. It was the preservation laws, that people were wanting to restore them, but it was just simply easier to store their farm machinery in them, which does actually happen. They do store their farm machinery in them. So I went to Ireland to find out. This is kind of like the distribution of tower houses in Ireland. As you can see, there's a lot in this area right here, right in here, and some more on the the east side. Very few up north. There are some in Northern Ireland here, but I stayed just in Ireland. And I performed my research about in this little area right here. It was County Tipperary is where it was. And then here, I started way up here, and I traveled from here kind of along the roads. From here to down here is about like a 40 to 50 mile journey. So it's not as the crow flies, but where I went to all these tower houses and went back and forth, I went over 109 miles. So like I said, I started up here, kind of went away down here, over here, and then back over here. And in that, I will talk to people who have restored tower houses. 3 of the tower houses I visited had already been restored. I visited 26 total, and 3 of those were owned by the state. So I talked to the ones who haven't restored them as well, to talk to them as to why they haven't restored their tower houses. So let's see here. I also studied the preservation laws as well. I talked to a governmental official who is kind of over the preservation laws in County Tipperary. So when I went and visited these tower houses, when I came back, I compiled all the tower houses that I visited and made a survey, kind of just a compilation of tower houses, talked about their history, each history, archaeological features, architectural features, just anything and everything about my visits. So first, I want to talk about 2 important tower houses that I visited that are not restored. And this is Knockagh Castle and Killowney Castle. And while most of them are square, a few are round. They don't have to be square to be a tower house. Knockagh Castle. It was built in 1640 by Sir John Moores. Not much else is known about it other than who built it. Some owners here and there were recorded, but not too many. Now, like I said, it was round outside, but if you see here, it's hard to tell from this picture, but the inside of it is actually square. So while it was built circular outside, it was built square inside, and then the extra spaces between that square section and the actual outer wall was like smaller rooms built inside. And as you can see here, that's my foot right there. It's a circular stairwell, and I'm about 4 stories up right here. That's actually the floor of the 2nd story, so I'm pretty high up there. And these things, they're pretty stable. The stairwells are stable. Other than that, I didn't venture much anywhere else other than that. I stayed on the stairwell because I was, in this one at least, I was by myself in this thing. So the current owner, he's about 70 years old, and he was a character, let me tell you. He was very interesting. His grandfather passed the farm down to him, and his grandfather knocked out the first few steps. This is unfortunate, but why he did this, they own cattle, and some cows had actually climbed the stairs, gotten to the top, and they couldn't get them down, because I guess the way cows climb upstairs, they couldn't get down. So unfortunately, the cattle actually died up in the top, but they knocked the stairs out, the first few, so the cows couldn't climb up to the top. And so I talked to the gentleman who owns it, and he's actually said lack of money and not the restoration laws were keeping him from restoring it. This is a drawing that he provided me, or he let me take a picture of. And why this is, well, first off, you can see here's the actual tower house, and then they have built this whole area out in front of it, the wall and another smaller building out in front of it, and that is actually completely gone now. As you see, that's there on the left, that's all that's left of that whole area. And why this was significant in my research, I could not find this picture on Google. I don't know if in Ireland, if there's a digital copy of this, but I wanted to include in my thesis with the additional research just so there is a digital record of this. So then Killowney Castle. They don't know who built it or who owned it, but the earliest record comes from 1640, and Rory O'Kennedy is listed as the owner. A lot of the O'Kennedys from that time they owned about 10 to 15 tower houses in that area. Now, why this castle is important, this tower house, is that Rory O'Kennedy, it's theorized that he was the last Gaelic chieftain in Ireland, and he lived here. After him, they operated under English law. It's recorded, but he was the last chieftain to operate under Gaelic law. And this tower house, the one that he owned, is just simply sitting there, going unrestored, and nothing is being done. And the owners, unfortunately, cannot receive funding due to the classification of the tower house. It's listed as a protected structure. Let's see here, and that's really why I wanted to include it. As you can see here, these beams here are actually the original beams that were there when it was built. At least that's what they believe. So it's been preserved very well. So then I visited 3 restored tower houses: Tullaun Castle, Ballytarsna Castle, and Grantstown Castle. Tullaun Castle is still in the process of being restored. Ballytarsna and Grantstown have been completely restored. It is owned by Kevin and Sonia Burgeon. Kevin, he does most of the work on the castle himself. He's Irish, and Sonia is actually from Australia. I'm not sure how they met, but they're now married and are restoring this castle. They rent it out to people during the summer, and there's no heating or air in this tower house. And the others, there is heating. So in the winter, Kevin and Sonia, they live in it. And they wanted to create a authentic 16th century experience. So they only offer electricity in one little room, and it's a little tiny kitchen. So they have the oven, the refrigerator, and that's about it. That's the only electricity in there. And lime mortar is used to hold the stones together. You can see the white inside. It has like a white plaster around it. That's used to seal the walls. And like I said, they are still in the restoration process. Ballytarsna Castle, it's owned by John Carganan, and he is a master of stone masonry. And he also restores these castles. You can buy a unrestored tower house, and he will actually restore it for you. And he's actually American. And he gave me a tour of the castle. When he was doing the restoration, anytime they'd have to take stone out, he was very, very adamant about recycling the removed stone and mixing it with the fresh lime mortar. Whenever they would get like old stone that couldn't be put into the castle, he would throw it into the mixer and put it into the lime mortar that covers the inside and outside and holds the stones together. He wanted to renovate it with modern amenities all throughout. Basically, he said when they bought it, they made the decision that they were not going to live in the 16th century. And it has been completely restored. Him and his family do live there in the lower sections, and they rent out the upper floors. And around it, around tower houses is what was called a bawn. It's basically just a wall surrounding it, and he plans to rebuild that in the near future. That's what he's going through the legal process now. This picture right here, this is what they call an oubliette, and that is basically a dungeon. People were put down there to be kept, people who were of value. And he actually let me crawl down or climb down into it, and it's just a space about yay wide, and wouldn't want to have been thrown down there in the 16th century. And then Grantstown Castle, it's owned by Cecil Farrar. He was amazing. He was very sophisticated, and he loved history. I could have listened to him talk all day. When he had purchased it, most of the work had been done on the tower house already. The previous owners, they had tried to restore it, and they had done most of like the stonemasonry work, all the heavy work, and they simply ran out of money and had ended up having to sell it, and he purchased it and done all kind of like the utilities. He put in electricity, heating, all of that. He had to replace the staircase. It wasn't good enough, so they had to put in a new staircase. And Cecil, he is very much, he loves antiques. And he actually has a cannon, a small cannon, sitting in his dining room. So it was a wonderful experience. And here is a picture I actually took from the very top of his tower house. You can just see the Irish landscape. It was amazing. So my research conclusions, I originally thought that the preservation laws were restricting tower house owners. If that makes sense from an American's point of view. If I owned something that was 400 years old, I would put everything I had into getting it restored. But to the Irish, that's kind of normal to them to maybe not own that, but just they're everywhere. So they're not seen as important. Well, they are seen as important, but just not as important as we would think. And like I said, financial limitations were the main thing keeping them from restoring them. Everybody I talked to seemed to say that it was the financial limitations. And then one owner who had restored it said that he would suggest at least €1 million, which is about, right now, 1.2 million US dollars. Also, there are some other reasons. Many of the farmers, they inherit them, like the owner of Knockagh Castle. They inherit them and they're on their farmland and they raise cattle for a living. So they're almost seen as like one described it like a chain around their neck. One who had restored it said that about the farmers. But yeah, they just inherit them and there's not that much interest. They would rather be tending to their cattle. And then here's another reason. Ballytarsna Castle is another ruin left to remind us of Cromwell. That came from 1932. It was a quote given about a tower house. A lot of the Irish see these tower houses as they're reminders of when the Irish were suppressed by the English, similar to how like the Civil War monuments are seen here in America. These castles are reminders to them. So some people don't like them being there. They're just reminders of suppression of the Irish. So that was my research conclusions. And I include this picture in here. By far my favorite picture from my trip. There's a castle in the background. There's sheep everywhere. That one's smiling for the selfie. But why I include this is when I came to MTSU, I had a dream to go to Ireland. I never thought I would go there and perform research. So, and by traveling by bicycle, I was able to immerse myself in the culture and learn about their heritage, talk to just the local people, stay with them, eat with them show me around, show me their castles. It was such an amazing experience. I encourage you all to do the same if ever given the chance. Go to a country that you always wanted to visit and just immerse yourself with the locals. Don't just go see the touristy areas, which I did do, but I also just immersed myself in the culture, and I would tell you all to do the same. So.
I have a question for both of you, and they're kind of related. So, did you knock on doors, Matthew, to
Yes.
find these people?
Yes.
And tell us about that. And then how did you find your subjects to tell these side students? So.
Yes, I went door to door knocking. The 3 restored castles, I was able to contact them before I went and set up actual times to go visit because it's their business. But other than that, the ones, the unrestored, I went knocking on doors and sometimes multiple doors. Like I would see a tower house and I would go knock on that door or a door closest, the house closest to it and try to find out who owned it. So yeah, I went around knocking on doors unannounced.
Good thing you're in Ireland.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Did they like your accent?
Some people, where I have a very country accent, I was raised in the mountains of East Tennessee. Some didn't even know it was American. Like they were trying to find out where I was from. And I had one lady tell me that normally American accents, she can't stand them, but she loved mine, where it was, they don't know it's country, but to us it's country, so.
Well, mine is so much less exciting, but I worked with Dr. Korsenge in the University Studies Department, and he was teaching a class that had 6 students in it, and because I was wanting to do a research project with him, it kind of fell into my lap, really. It was like a perfect opportunity. So 5 of them agreed, so 1 of them didn't, which is fine. But yeah, so they were just in the class, and it was really convenient. So.
Question here.
Did you get a grant to go to Ireland?
I did. The Eureka Grant, I encourage anyone and everyone who is performing research to apply for the Eureka Grant.
Did you have to pay a lot out of pocket too for your trip?
Very little. So it was kind of a balance, so it was worth it.
So you said you went on bike. Were you, and you knocked on like random people's doors, were you like nervous that you were you by yourself?
Yes, I was by myself the whole
Did
time.
that make you like, were you like a little bit nervous? Like,
The Irish are very, very happy people. Not always. I did get cussed out once, but we won't talk about that. But no, they are very welcoming people. Yeah, being by myself in Ireland, I wasn't too worried about because they were so happy. But the first door I knocked on, like I stumbled my words. I was like, I'm Middle Tennessee State University student. It was horrible. But then after that, like I was just trying to.
were people nice and where did you stay? Did they
Airbnb. Yeah, Airbnb is where I stayed.
So for Matthew,
Yes.
Did you find out whether or not like the counties or the local or national government why they don't like invest more of their own resources in kind of restoring these? Is it because they're privately owned or?
I wasn't able to find out exactly why they don't. They do offer some grants and funds, and some are actually owned by the government. 1 or 2 of them I visited. You could go in it and you could see where they hadn't restored it necessarily, but they were preserving what was still left. So some are, but they are just privately owned. So.
And a second part of that was the reason that the costs were so high is because the regulations cause you to have to spend more money, or was it just that it's a hard job?
Both. Just the application process could cost thousands of dollars. It normally did cost thousands of dollars just to get permission to do anything to them because they are protected. So they do have to go through an application process. That takes thousands of euros. And then the regulations, they do have to do it a specific way. They have to have an archaeologist on site to approve everything. So there are a lot of costs related to the regulations, but simply just labor to do it and just the supplies. It costs a lot too.
So, how did you pick your sort of research area? Is it just like, oh, well, I found, look, I got appointments to go to these 3 places, so I just went to this general area, or was there more into it?
Kind of. When I was researching them, just my initial kind of online Googling these tower houses, I found 4 all in County Tipperary. I just got blessed by having 4 in one area that I found, and 3 of them responded back to me, and I was able to set up appointments. So, yeah, that map that I had, the very top was the first restored tower house. About through the middle was the second, and then near the end was the third. So I kind of found ones that were not restored around those 3 that were restored. Yes.
Yeah, I had one for Sarah. What brought you to the idea to do qualitative instead of quantitative research? Like, did you know going in that with qualitative you would probably miss that why that links those 2 kind of statistical outputs?
Yeah, so being international relations, we have to do a research project for research methods, and so that is quantitative. And so I'd already done that, and I felt the same way. Like I did it on education in OECD countries, and I felt like there was a story there. Like there's a reason why you get these certain numbers, and the numbers don't tell the whole story. So I did, have the idea that I wanted to do something small scale. Like I said, the 5 people, that was kind of a fluke, that I didn't know that was going to happen before I did it, but I knew that I wanted to do something smaller scale because I believed that the student perspective is, not often told.
My voice is kind of gone, but you just talked a lot about Adam and Emily. The other 2 people, what did you find out from them?
Yes,
I know that the highs and lows, but like.
Yeah, there were 3 other students. 2 of them didn't show up a lot, so they turned in their work, which in itself, is a finding to be analyzed. But the other 3 were kind of mediocre students. They didn't use effective methods, but they also weren't doing too bad. So in my thesis, that conclusion was kind of, they had gotten away with what they were doing thus far, and it hadn't really kicked them down yet. But kind of the hypothesis was that they were going to learn that the effective methods weren't helping.
My follow-up, were these freshmen that you were looking at?
Yes.
Do either of y'all have any interest in continuing your research in the future?
If I pursue my master's in history, I would like to build on that, but that's all dependent on what I choose for a master's later in life.
I'm working on getting mine published right now, so.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you know of, or did you discover any methods that you started to use after, like study methods? that you
I'm
did?
afraid of this question because the answer is I used all of the effective ones before, and that really sounds bad. But because it's like, I'm not trying to be prideful, but I had learned about these in my University 1010 class, the kind of university studies. So I had learned about them, and I wanted to use them because I love to learn and I really wanted to be successful in college. I started to incorporate the interleave practice, which is where you mix up the topics that you're studying. So you do like 30 minutes on one, 30 minutes on the other, kind of in succession like that. So I use that more. And practice testing, which is horrible and everyone hates it because it takes a lot of time. But that one, because it's the most research proven, I did start to use that more too, so yeah.
We are out of time. Please join me in thanking our presenters.